Anna's childhood was a careful choreography of expectations. Her mother, Elena, was a figure of elegance and restraint, always dressed impeccably, her hair neatly pinned, her words measured. Her father, Anton, was a stern, imposing man who commanded respect wherever he went. From the time Anna could walk, she had been reminded of the legacy she carried on her shoulders. In their world, marriage was not about love, but alliances. The well-being of the family, its reputation, its wealth, was built on careful negotiations and contracts, not fleeting emotions. As a little girl, Anna had once dreamt of love like the heroines in the novels she secretly devoured, tales of passion and adventure. But as she grew older, those dreams were stifled by the cold realities her parents laid before her. A good marriage is not about the heart, Anna, her mother often said. It's about the mind. You will understand when you are older. Elena would brush Anna's hair, her touch soft but her words hard. You will marry a man of standing, and together, you will secure our family's future. Anna always nodded, even if her heart remained unconvinced. She had learned long ago that resistance only brought disapproving frowns from her father and gentle, but firm lectures from her mother. So she buried her dreams and waited. The village where Anna lived was a quaint, picturesque place nestled between rolling hills and forests, but it was also a gilded cage. Her parents' estate was grand, filled with everything a young girl could want. Fine dresses, delicious meals, and the best education money could buy. Yet it felt empty. The lavish dinners, the afternoon teas with her mother's friends, all were performances, rehearsed dialogues of how the daughters would be presented to the right families. There was no room for individuality, only duty. But everything changed the day she met David. It was a late summer afternoon when Anna first saw him. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the marketplace. She had accompanied her mother into town, something she rarely did. Her mother had gone off to speak with a merchant about importing fabrics, leaving Anna to wander through the stalls. She paused at one where a boy was selling fresh apples, their skins gleaming in the fading light. David, standing behind the stall, caught her eye immediately. There was a simplicity about him that set him apart from the polished suitors she had met at her family's gatherings. His dark hair was a little too long, curling at the edges, and his hands were rough from work. But what drew Anna in were his eyes, deep brown and filled with a quiet warmth she hadn't seen before. He smiled as she approached, his expression friendly but respectful. "Would you like to try one?" he asked, holding up a particularly red apple. Anna felt her cheeks flush slightly, caught off guard by how easily he spoke to her. "Yes, thank you," she murmured, taking the apple and biting into it. The sweetness of the fruit burst on her tongue, but what lingered was the way he watched her, not with the practiced charm of a suitor, but with genuine curiosity. Their conversation was brief, just a few words exchanged about the apples and the weather. But it was enough to leave a lasting impression on Anna. That night, as she lay in bed, she found herself thinking about the boy from the market. The way his smile had made her heart beat a little faster. Over the weeks that followed, Anna found more reasons to visit the marketplace. Her mother, busy with social obligations and arranging meetings with potential suitors, didn't notice her daughter's newfound interest in running errands. Each time Anna saw David, their conversations grew longer. At first, they talked about simple things, the weather, the town, their families. But soon, their discussions became deeper, more intimate. David spoke of his dreams of traveling, of seeing the world beyond their village. Anna, in turn, shared her frustrations about the expectations placed on her, the future that had been planned without her consent. David was unlike anyone Anna had ever known. He came from a humble family, his father a skilled carpenter, his mother a seamstress. Their house was small but full of love, something Anna had glimpsed from afar. In David's world, people didn't marry for alliances or status. They married for love. It was a concept Anna had always heard of but never believed could be real, until now. Their secret meetings became the highlight of Anna's days. While her parents spoke of business deals and arranged introductions to eligible men, Anna's heart was elsewhere. She began sneaking out at night, slipping through the gardens of her family's estate and making her way to the woods where David would be waiting. They would sit under the stars, talking for hours, sometimes in silence, simply enjoying the presence of one another. "I wish things could be different," Anna whispered one night, her head resting against David's shoulder. They had found a small clearing in the forest, hidden away from prying eyes. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting soft shadows on the ground. "They can be," David replied, his voice gentle but firm. He turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "We could run away, Anna, start a new life somewhere far from here. I know it sounds impossible, but I would give you the world if I could." Anna's heart ached at his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to throw caution to the wind and escape with him, leaving behind the weight of her family's expectations. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. Her parents had plans for her, plans that couldn't be easily undone. If they found out about David, it would be a disaster, not just for her, but for him as well. "They would never let me go," she whispered. "And they would ruin you if they found out." David took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "Let me worry about that. All I care about is you." For a moment, Anna allowed herself to imagine a future with David. A small house, perhaps by the sea, far away from the suffocating world she lived in. They would be happy, free to live as they wished, unburdened by the expectations of others. But as the dream took shape in her mind, reality crept in, reminding her of the chains that bound her to her family. Their secret love was a dangerous thing. Each meeting, each whispered promise, brought them closer to the edge of discovery. And yet, neither could bear to end it. Anna had never felt so alive, and David's love was a light in the darkness of her carefully controlled world. But time was running out. Her parents were already discussing her future marriage in hushed tones. A suitor had been chosen, Robert, the son of a wealthy businessman. The announcement was imminent, and when that day came, Anna knew her life with David would be over. As the days grew shorter and the air turned crisp with the approach of autumn, Anna's heart grew heavier. She clung to the moments she had with David, knowing they were fleeting. Each stolen kiss, each tender embrace was a defiance of the fate that awaited her. But the inevitable loomed closer, and Anna knew that soon she would be forced to choose between the duty she had been raised to uphold and the love she had found in David. And in the quiet corners of her heart, she feared the consequences of that choice. The winds of change were coming, and with them, the storm that would threaten to tear her world apart. The day of Anna's engagement came sooner than she had anticipated. It was announced with much fanfare, a grand event in the stately hall of her family's home. Flowers adorned every corner, and the scent of freshly polished wood mingled with the delicate fragrance of roses. Guests from prominent families arrived in elegant carriages, their laughter filling the evening air as they congratulated Anna's parents on the fine match they had secured. Anna, dressed in a gown of shimmering silk, felt like an actor in a play she never wanted to star in. Her movements were slow and deliberate, her smile fixed as she greeted the guests, her heart heavy with each step. Her mother, beaming with pride, stood by her side, whispering gentle reminders of the importance of the night. "Remember, Anna, this is for the family, for your future." The man she was to marry, Robert, stood tall and imposing in the center of the room. He was everything her parents had ever hoped for: wealthy, successful, and well-connected. His family's business spanned multiple cities, and his charm and good looks made him the ideal suitor in the eyes of society. But as Anna glanced at him from across the room, all she could see was the coldness in his eyes, the indifference behind his polite words. Robert greeted her with a stiff smile as he took her hand for the first dance. "You look beautiful," he remarked, though there was no warmth in his voice, no tenderness in his touch. Anna nodded, feeling the weight of his hand on hers like a chain binding her to her fate. They danced in silence, moving through the motions expected of them. But Anna's thoughts were far away, drifting back to the nights in the forest with David, to the quiet conversations and stolen kisses that now felt like a distant dream. When the evening finally drew to a close, Anna stood by the window of her room, staring out into the darkness. The stars that once seemed so full of promise now seemed to mock her. In the distance, beyond the gardens, she knew David was out there somewhere. She had not seen him since her parents had officially announced the engagement, not daring to risk one final meeting. It had been too painful to say goodbye, so she hadn't. Instead, she had retreated into silence, pretending as if their love had never existed. But the absence of David was a hollow ache in her chest, and she could not shake the feeling that she had left a part of herself behind in the woods. The weeks passed in a blur of preparations for the wedding. Anna's mother oversaw every detail, ensuring the event would be nothing short of perfect. Invitations were sent to all the important families, and the guest list was filled with influential names. It was to be the wedding of the year, a union that would elevate both families in the eyes of society. Through it all, Anna remained silent. She had accepted her fate, resigned to the role that had been chosen for her. She told herself that this was what was expected of her, that this was her duty. But at night, when she lay awake in her bed, she couldn't escape the memories of David, his smile, his laughter, the way he had looked at her, as if she were the most important person in the world. The night before the wedding, Anna stood alone in the garden, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The sky was clear, and the stars glittered overhead. It was the same garden she had once sneaked through to meet David, but now it felt like a prison. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of her gown, her heart heavy with the weight of what tomorrow would bring. Anna? Her mother's voice broke through the silence, gentle but firm. It's late, darling. You should get some rest. Anna nodded, turning away from the sky. Yes, mother. The wedding day dawned with all the grandeur that had been promised. The church was filled with flowers, the pews packed with guests dressed in their finest attire. Anna's dress was a masterpiece of lace and satin, a vision of elegance as she walked down the aisle. But inside, she felt nothing. Her steps felt mechanical, as if she were floating through a dream, her mind detached from the moment. Robert stood at the altar, his expression unreadable as she approached. His family watched with approval, his father already talking business with Anna's father as they waited for the ceremony to begin. This was not a day about love. It was a transaction, a deal sealed with vows and promises that held no meaning to her. When the priest began to speak, Anna's heart pounded in her chest. She could barely hear the words as he led them through the ceremony, her mind too clouded with thoughts of what could have been. She glanced at Robert, searching for something, anything, that would make this easier. But his face remained impassive, his gaze focused on the future that held little more than a partnership of convenience. When it came time to speak her vows, Anna's voice trembled. The words felt foreign on her tongue, each syllable a betrayal of the love she still held for David. But she forced herself to say them, knowing there was no turning back now. I do, she whispered, her voice barely audible. With those two words, the last remnants of her dream were shattered. Anna was no longer the girl who had wandered the woods in search of love. She was now Robert's wife, bound to a life of duty, wealth, and cold formality. After the ceremony, the reception was held in a grand ballroom, filled with laughter and music. Anna stood beside Robert, her hand resting lightly on his arm, as they greeted the endless stream of guests who came to offer their congratulations. She smiled when required, laughed politely at the jokes she didn't hear, and accepted the compliments on her beauty and grace with practiced poise. But beneath the surface, she felt hollow. The world around her seemed distant, as if she were watching her life from the outside, unable to feel anything but the cold ache of regret. Later that evening, as the guests danced and celebrated, Anna slipped away from the crowd. She found a quiet corner of the ballroom, hidden from view, and allowed herself a moment to breathe. The weight of the day pressed down on her, suffocating in its finality. She was married. The life she had known with David was over, and there was no escaping the reality of her new existence. Robert found her a few moments later, his face calm but distant. He sat beside her, offering her a glass of champagne. "You've done well today, Anna," he said, his voice smooth and devoid of emotion. "We've made a strong alliance." She looked at him, searching for any sign of warmth or connection, but found none. "Yes," she replied softly. "We have." Robert nodded, satisfied. "This is what our families wanted. It's for the best." Anna's heart sank as she realized that this was all Robert would ever be, a partner in name, a figurehead in a marriage that had nothing to do with love or companionship. He was content with their arrangement, seeing it as nothing more than a means to an end. As the night wore on and the guests slowly departed, Anna returned to her new home with Robert. The grand house, filled with priceless artwork and luxurious furnishings, felt cold and impersonal. It was a place built for appearances, not for warmth or love. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a monotonous routine. Robert was often away on business, and when he was home, their conversations were brief and formal. They shared meals in silence, slept in separate rooms, and lived parallel lives under the same roof. Outwardly, everything appeared perfect. To the world, Anna was the perfect wife, and Robert the perfect husband. But inside, she felt a growing emptiness, a void that only deepened with each passing day. Anna had become exactly what her parents had wanted, a dutiful wife, married to a man of wealth and status. But in doing so, she had lost herself. The life she had imagined with David was gone, replaced by a hollow existence where duty and obligation ruled. And yet, deep inside, the memory of David lingered, like a small flame that refused to be extinguished. No matter how hard she tried to suppress it, her heart still belonged to him. And in the quiet moments of her day, when she was alone with her thoughts, she wondered if she would ever truly be free. Several years had passed since Anna's wedding, though it felt to her like a lifetime. The grandeur of her wedding day had long faded, leaving behind the reality of her marriage, a cold, distant arrangement that felt more like a business contract than a union of two souls. Robert had grown increasingly indifferent over time, treating Anna as little more than a fixture in his life. He spent most of his days traveling for business, his absence more familiar to Anna than his presence. Their home, though vast and beautiful, had become a silent prison for her. Its ornate walls and lavish decorations did little to fill the void in her heart. She had adjusted to her role as Robert's wife, playing the part expected of her, attending social functions, managing the household, and keeping up appearances. To the outside world, they were the picture of success, a powerful couple bound by wealth and status. But Anna's life was hollow. The love she had once dreamt of was nowhere to be found in her marriage. Conversations with Robert were few and brief, usually revolving around business or their public image. There were no shared moments of tenderness, no whispered affections, no spark between them. The loneliness crept in like a shadow, ever-present and inescapable. One autumn afternoon, Anna found herself wandering through the market square, a place she seldom visited now. Her errands were often taken care of by the staff, but on this day, she had felt a sudden urge to escape the confines of her home. The marketplace, with its lively chatter and vibrant energy, reminded her of simpler times, of her youth, of the days before her marriage, and of David. She hadn't thought about David in a long time, not consciously at least, but somewhere deep in her heart, the memory of him still lived, tucked away like a treasured secret. She had tried to forget him after her wedding, telling herself that part of her life was over. Yet in quiet moments, when Robert's absence weighed heavily on her, she would sometimes wonder what had become of him. Did he still think of her? Had he found happiness? As she walked through the market, those thoughts surfaced again, unbidden and unexpected. Anna shook them off, telling herself it was pointless to dwell on the past. David was part of another life, one she could never return to. But as she moved through the crowd, her heart nearly stopped. There he was. David stood across the square, his back turned to her as he examined a display of wooden carvings. His hair was longer than she remembered, and his clothes bore the marks of hard, honest work. But there was no mistaking him. Anna's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding so loudly she feared the entire marketplace could hear it. For a moment, she considered turning around, walking away before he noticed her. It would be easier that way, safer. But something in her feet wouldn't let her move. She stood frozen, watching him, her mind racing. She hadn't seen David since the days before her wedding, when she had finally accepted the path her family had laid out for her. To see him now here so unexpectedly was like a dream she hadn't dared to dream. As if sensing her gaze, David turned. Their eyes met across the marketplace, and time seemed to stand still. The bustling crowd faded into the background. The noise of the market dimmed, and all that remained was the two of them, staring at each other like no time had passed at all. David's expression shifted from surprise to something deeper, something she recognized immediately. His eyes softened, and a faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips, though it was tinged with sadness. He stepped toward her, and before Anna knew what she was doing, she found herself moving toward him too. "Anna," he breathed when they were close enough to speak. His voice was low and familiar, and it sent a shiver down her spine. "I never thought I'd see you again." Anna swallowed hard, emotions she had long buried rushing to the surface. "Neither did I," she whispered, her voice barely audible. For a moment, she wasn't the wife of a wealthy businessman. She was simply Anna, the girl who had once loved him. They stood in awkward silence for a few seconds, the weight of the years between them pressing down on both of them. Finally, David cleared his throat, his eyes never leaving hers. "How have you been?" Anna forced a smile, though her heart ached at the question. I've been well," she lied, knowing that he could probably see the truth in her eyes. "And you?" David's smile was bittersweet. "I've been making do." There was a heaviness in his voice, a sadness that mirrored her own. "A lot has changed." Anna nodded, unsure of what to say. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected the flood of emotions that seeing him again would bring. Her hands trembled slightly as she struggled to keep her composure. "I heard you moved away," she said, grasping at something to say, anything to fill the silence. "I did," he replied. "For a while, at least. I needed to get away, after everything." He hesitated, as if unsure how much to say. "But I came back a few months ago. I missed the town, I suppose." Anna's heart twisted painfully in her chest. She knew what he meant by everything. She had been the one to leave him, the one to choose duty over love. And yet, standing before him now, she felt the weight of that choice more than ever. David glanced around the market, then back at her. "Do you have time to talk?" he asked, his voice tentative, as though he feared she might refuse. Anna hesitated. Every logical part of her mind screamed that she should walk away, that she had no business speaking with David after all these years. She was a married woman now, bound by vows she could not break. But her heart, the heart that had never truly let go of him, wouldn't allow her to leave. "Yes," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'd like that." They walked together to a small, secluded spot by the river that ran through the town, a place they had often visited in secret all those years ago. The memories came flooding back as they sat on the grassy bank, the sound of the water mingling with the soft rustle of the wind. It felt as though no time had passed, though they both knew it had. David spoke first, his voice steady but filled with unspoken sorrow. "I never stopped thinking about you, Anna." Even after everything that happened, I couldn't forget you. Anna's heart ached at his words. She had feared this, fear that he had held on to the love they once shared, while she had tried so hard to bury it. David, she trailed off, unsure of how to explain the years of silence, the distance she had put between them. He shook his head gently, his eyes full of understanding. You don't have to explain. I know why you did what you did. I always knew. He paused, looking out at the river, his jaw tense. But it didn't make it hurt any less. Anna lowered her gaze, guilt and sorrow washing over her. She had known, even then, that she had broken his heart. But what choice had she had? Her family's expectations, her duty, had left her with no other path. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. David looked at her then, his expression softening. I know, but we can't change the past, can we? They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Anna felt the pull of the life she had chosen, the marriage that bound her to Robert, the responsibilities that came with it. But sitting there with David, she also felt the stirrings of a love she had tried so hard to forget. David's hand brushed against hers, a small, fleeting touch that sent a jolt through her. She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. I never stopped loving you, he said quietly, his eyes searching hers. Not for a single day. Anna's heart shattered at his words. She had spent years convincing herself that love didn't matter, that it was a luxury she couldn't afford. But now, hearing David's confession, she realized the truth she had been hiding from all along. I never stopped loving you either, she admitted, her voice trembling. For the first time in years, Anna felt alive. But she was no longer the girl who could dream of running away with David. She was a wife now, bound to a marriage that held her captive. And as much as her heart yearned for him, she knew that their love could never be what it once was. They parted that evening with a quiet promise to see each other again. But in Anna's heart, she knew that what they had found in each other once had not disappeared. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to return. And with David's reappearance in her life, everything was about to change. In the months that followed David's return, Anna found herself living two lives. By day, she played the role of the dutiful wife, attending social events and dinners with Robert, who remained as indifferent and distant as ever. But by night, in the secrecy of shadows and whispers, she met with David. Each meeting was a brief escape from the hollow existence she had become accustomed to, a taste of the love she had long buried. Their love, rekindled with new intensity, was like a fire that burned brighter with each passing moment. It felt as though the years apart had only deepened their connection. Every time Anna slipped away from her home to be with David, she felt alive again, like she had stepped back into the days of their youth, before duty and obligation had torn them apart. But reality was never far behind. Anna knew she was living a dangerous lie. She was still Robert's wife, bound to a marriage that, while loveless, carried immense consequences. Her family would be ruined by scandal if anyone found out about her affair with David, and society would never forgive her. More than anything, she feared Robert's reaction. He had never cared for her in a meaningful way, but his pride and reputation mattered deeply to him. What would he do if he found out she had betrayed him? Despite these fears, Anna couldn't bring herself to stop. She told herself that she was careful, that no one would ever know, that as long as her secret remained hidden, she could have both worlds. But as the months went on, the burden of living two lives began to weigh heavily on her. The nights with David, while filled with love, were also filled with guilt. Then came the day that changed everything. Anna woke one morning feeling unwell, a deep fatigue settling over her body. At first, she thought it was the stress of the situation catching up to her. She had been restless, her heart torn between the life she had chosen and the life she secretly desired. But as the days passed, her symptoms grew stronger: nausea, dizziness, and an unmistakable tenderness in her body that filled her with a sense of dread. It was her maid, Maria, who first voiced the suspicion. As Maria helped Anna dress one morning, her sharp eyes lingered on her mistress's pale face. "My lady," she said softly, her tone hesitant but concerned, "have you considered that you might be with child?" The word sent a shock through Anna, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't even thought of the possibility. Her marriage to Robert was mostly a formality, and though they shared a bed on occasion, there was little passion between them. But David, their nights together had been filled with love, and in those moments, she had allowed herself to forget everything but him. Anna's hands shook as she dismissed Maria, her mind reeling. Could it be true? Could she really be pregnant? And if so, who was the father? The question echoed in her mind, each answer more terrifying than the last. For days, Anna kept the fear to herself, too afraid to confirm what she already suspected. But as her body continued to change, the truth became undeniable. She was pregnant. The revelation filled her with both joy and terror. The idea of carrying a child, possibly David's, gave her hope, a glimmer of the future she had always dreamt of. But the reality of her situation was far more complicated. If the child was Robert's, her duty would be clear. But if it was David's, Anna's thoughts spiraled as she considered what to do. She couldn't keep the secret for long. Her condition would soon become obvious, and once it did, everything would unravel. She had to make a choice, and she had to make it quickly. One evening, under the guise of attending a social function, Anna slipped away to meet David by the river, the place where they always met. When she arrived, David was already there, waiting for her with that familiar, patient look on his face. But as soon as Anna saw him, the weight of her secret became unbearable. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, her voice trembling. David's expression shifted from warmth to concern as he stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. "What is it, Anna?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with worry. "What's wrong?" Anna swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. I'm pregnant." For a moment, David said nothing. The world around them seemed to freeze, the river's gentle flow the only sound cutting through the stillness. Then, slowly, a soft smile spread across David's face, his hand tightening around hers. "Anna, that's wonderful." But Anna's joy at his words was short-lived. She pulled her hand away, her eyes filling with tears. "David, you don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know if it's yours or Robert's." David's face fell, the weight of her words settling between them like a stone. He took a deep breath, his expression turning serious. "It doesn't matter to me," he said softly. "Whether the child is mine or not, I'll be here for you. I'll love you and the baby, no matter what." Anna's heart ached at his words, his unwavering devotion making her feel both loved and trapped. How could she choose between him and the life she had been forced into? The thought of raising a child with David filled her with hope, but the reality of her marriage to Robert and the expectations of her family loomed over her like a dark cloud. That night, after returning to the house she shared with Robert, Anna made a decision. She couldn't live with the secret any longer. She had to confront Robert, to tell him the truth, no matter the consequences. It was time to face the life she had been avoiding for so long. The following evening, as Robert sat in his study reviewing business papers, Anna gathered her courage and knocked softly on the door. He looked up from his desk, his expression cool as usual. "Anna," he said, his voice clipped, "is something the matter?" Anna took a deep breath, stepping into the room. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. Robert leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "Go on." "I'm pregnant," she confessed, her hands shaking at her sides. For a moment, Robert said nothing, his face unreadable. Then, he leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "Is it mine?" he asked, his tone calm but cold. Anna felt her heart lurch in her chest. She had hoped he wouldn't ask, but of course he would. She had known this moment would come. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a long silence. Robert stared at her for what felt like an eternity, his eyes piercing and calculating. Anna braced herself for the worst, for anger, for accusations, for the storm she had always feared. But when Robert finally spoke, his words stunned her. "I don't care," he said flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. "I've never cared for this marriage, Anna, and I don't intend to start now. Whether the child is mine or someone else's is irrelevant to me. The only thing that matters is how this looks to the outside world." Anna blinked in disbelief, her heart racing. "What are you saying?" Robert rose from his chair, adjusting his cufflinks with an air of calm detachment. "I'm saying we'll keep up appearances for the sake of our families. But I want nothing more to do with you or this child. I'll arrange for a quiet divorce once the baby is born. You can live your life however you wish." Anna stared at him, her mind reeling. She had expected anger, but not this cold indifference. The man she had married was offering her a way out, but at a cost. She would be free, but the scars of their marriage would linger, and society would judge her for the rest of her life. "Do you agree to these terms?" Robert asked, his tone sharp. Anna swallowed hard, her mind racing. She thought of David, of the future they could have together. She thought of the child growing inside her and the life she wanted to build. Slowly, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "I agree." And with that, the life Anna had once known came to an end. The divorce was swift and quiet, just as Robert had promised. Anna's parents, shocked and initially furious, tried to convince her to reconsider. But once they realized the marriage had long been hollow, they let go, though reluctantly. The rumors that circulated through society were unavoidable, but Anna found she no longer cared. For the first time, she was free from the expectations that had suffocated her. With the weight of her failed marriage lifted, Anna and David began a new chapter together. They left the town where so much of their heartache had unfolded, moving to a small, peaceful city where no one knew their past. David found work as a craftsman, and Anna, content at last, embraced her new life with him. When their child was born, a beautiful baby boy with David's dark hair and warm eyes, the bond between them grew even stronger. It was David's child, and the sight of him holding their son for the first time filled Anna with a joy she had never thought possible. All the fear and uncertainty of the past melted away in that moment, replaced by the quiet happiness of a life built on love. In time, Anna's parents softened. They realized that despite their plans, their daughter's happiness was what mattered most. Gradually, they accepted David into their lives, understanding that he was the man who had truly made Anna whole. The final scene of Anna's story unfolded on a gentle afternoon, where she and David walked through a park with their child. The air was warm, the sun casting a golden light over the trees. As their son giggled and ran ahead, David took Anna's hand, squeezing it gently. "We did it," he whispered. Anna smiled, her heart full. Yes, we did. She had chosen love despite the odds, and in doing so, she had finally found the life she had always dreamed of, one filled with peace, freedom, and the simple, quiet joy of being truly loved.